William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.
Hi everyone, welcome again to FutureCon, the second edition. It's our second day, the next to last panel with the awesome team, What Punk Are You? Past, present and future trends in anti-capitalist science fiction. First of all, I would like to say a few words about FutureCon. This year, we want to engage with even more native innovators and storytellers that make science fiction happen and flourish in their own language and markets. We want to build the tools that will reshape our own imagination, set up creative networks, and make room for independent voices, crafting publishing alternatives and self-sustainable connections to decolonize the future. We have more than 50 guests from more than 20 countries, showing the natural biodiversity of the future. This year, the team got even wider and more inclusive, and thanks to AUSIF, the Chilean Science Fiction Association, we could add more networks and skills. Last but not least, the fact that FutureCon is totally free and panels will be available on YouTube forever means that, while we don't ask for a ticket, we would appreciate a donation of a free amount of money to support the team. You can donate from $1 to wherever you want. Now, let me introduce our panelists from this panel. My name is Fábio Fernandes. I am from Brazil, living in Italy, and I am going to be your host. With me are Jay Springett from the UK, Nicoletta Vallorani from Italy, Pepe Rojo from Mexico, and Samit Vasu from India. I would like to ask each one of them to introduce themselves, and I will ask them the first question right away. What punk are you? Please, I would like to ask for Nicoletta to start.
Ladies first, as they say. So I'm from Italy, as you said. I'm a professor in life, a teacher and a researcher, shame on me. I'm also a novelist. And I started writing in 1993, which is ages ago. And in those times, in fact, cyberpunk was the great hit, in fact. So my first novel, which was rather naive, I guess, was totally modeled on the kind of novels, the kind of narratives I liked. And I really adored, for example, Pat Cadigan, Mind Players was one of my favorite novels. And also another text that had a really strong impact on my way of writing then was Blade Runner, of course. So my imagination was in fact shaped by that sort of narrative in science fiction that came from punk and somehow combined punk with this totally new and totally radical, totally rad issue of technology and what we could do with technology, not only in the scientific field, which is something I'm not trained in, but in the field of imagination. Which kind of new imagination could technology produce? In fact, I'm very much interested in dystopian imagination and speculative fiction. So my point was and still is in which way science fiction can and punk and cyberpunk and all those sort of punk coming out of the original movement, punk movement, which kind of imagination future imagination can be produced in terms of a better social organization, or also in terms of the kind of risk we could try to avoid in building our own future. So as you can understand, I tend to be, particularly in my narrative, but also in my life, I tend to be very political. I do believe that writing is a political act, and I do believe that science fiction is the social novel of today, in spite of its being set in the future or in alternative realities. I don't know if this answers your question. If I'm obliged to say which kind of punk I am, my answer is this one. I am a political punk, and I go back to the original meaning of the movement, which was a style which was meant to react against the rules of the past, and which was basically destructive. But at the same time, I want to build on this, on what is left by destruction. I want to build a new future. I want to try and build a new future, of course, not alone, not by myself, but I mean, with people willing to do this. You're muted. You're muted, Fabio.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Nicoletta. Now let's go to Jay Springett, please.
Just as I drink my British tea. Hello, everyone. My name's Jay Springett. I write online primarily as @thejmo, which is also my website address. In my professional life, I work as a strategist, and I'm very interested in the building and running of worlds, being the kind of the intersection, which is a buzzword, but the intersection of technology, people, and the culture that those things create. I'm also an essayist, and I dabble as a science fiction writer, but I'm here today as a Solarpunk because I've been an admin on solarpunks.net since 2014 and have seen the growth of the genre, or seen the genre grow from not existing at all to where we are today with, you know, all of the different anthologies and various things that are in the works.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jay. Pepe, please.
Oh, hi, everyone. Pepe Rojo here from Tijuana, the border between Mexico and the United States, which is by itself kind of like a science fictional place. What kind of punk am I? Oh my God, that's a hard one. I'm kind of like late for everything, but I was late for punk and I was late for cyberpunk. So it's kind of like a post-punk thing that's really just one letter away from past punk. I started writing science fiction in the 90s. So of course, especially in Latin America, cyberpunk was kind of like a huge thing. I remember reading Neuromancer and saying, why is this guy writing about downtown Mexico City when he was writing about Chiba City and how you could get all things in an illegal way? So that kind of like street level view of the world kind of like inflected my fiction. Science fiction has always been with me. I've been a lot more interested lately in how science fiction translates with reality and the crossings between them, and how science fiction is kind of like reality, just an illusion away. Seeing how those two things meld. I like the political part of what Nicoletta said. I'm also very, very, very for it. And the relationship between science fiction and reality is one of the kind of like the things that interest me a lot.
Okay, thank you. Samit.
Hi, Fabio. My name's Samit Vasu. I've been writing speculative fiction for almost 2 decades now, pretty much my whole adult life. My first book was out in 2003. The last one was out last year in India. It's coming out next year from Tor.com as The City Inside in the US. I've also co-directed a Bollywood movie. I've been writing comics for the last decade or so. So basically, the last I've just been typing away in various media for ever since I left college, which also involved a fair amount of typing. The question of what kind of punk I am is something that I've been struggling with for many years, and it's also something that I've discussed with my fellow Indian and South Asian fantasy and science fiction writers for a long time, and we couldn't decide on a term for ourselves. And part of that was because for most of us, we came to cyberpunk before we really knew what punk music was. And what happens in India is that both cyberpunk and punk and most other things that have a kind of Anglo-centric definition word-wise, these things come to us after they've been successful in kind of the corporate mechanism of marketing, of global publishing, of global culture, and then they reach us. So it's kind of hard to see them as counterculture or revolutionary or anything other than successful marketing, which tells us that this is a very interesting aesthetic for revolution. So it feels a bit disingenuous for us to kind of take the term punk for ourselves, but I've been thinking about this because you asked the question, and I should come up with a kind of punk. So I realized that while political punk is a lovely definition of a lot of the work that we're trying to do when describing when writing science fiction, which essentially I completely agree with Nicoletta. It's talking about the hopes and anxieties of the now and presenting it in a technological framework or a speculative framework that kind of goes beyond contemporary world. So the term that I came up with about 10 minutes ago, because it's been worrying me ever since you asked us, was visa punk. Visa punk because along with climate change and immigration being major concerns for everyone in this part of the world, a lot of us from Asia are looking for, more, along with the sense of counterculture expression, are looking for acceptance, really, of looking to kind of place our ideas and our speculative visions on par with the rest of the world. And which is why it's particularly exciting to be answering this question in FutureCon, because I love the vision behind this con. So new term for you, visa punk.
That's awesome. I loved it, Samit. Because that's it actually. When this panel was proposed, we were thinking about exactly this thing. You can't be punk without the political side. From time to time, I keep seeing people writing on social media and telling, "Oh, I don't want my fiction to be political," but everything is political. Every fiction is political. Maybe it's not overtly political, but it is political. And there's an awesome concept, an academic concept about a negative space. That when you don't talk about very explicitly not telling any people about the elephant in the room, you are being political as well. I remember being the first space operas. How do they use it to erase black people, for instance? And everyone, especially the case years ago of the sad puppies, they wanted to write space operas the old-fashioned way. The old-fashioned way being without black people, without women, maybe one or two, and without LGBTQ cutbag people. And here's the thing: punk is something so attractive that it became a suffix forever tied to the idea of science fiction. Because after cyberpunk, it was too good an idea to be left. So there came the steampunk, the solarpunk, and I think, and all of these punks are in some way or another trying to make a stand, a political stand. Visa Punk. I was just being someone in the comments there. I could see Visa Punk being a thing. Me too. I think that's what Spunk it's all about. And we already have a question here, or two questions. Steph Trove just said, she isn't a question, but I think it's very relevant to our discussion. I would assume that all punks are political the moment you peel away the statics. I'm not sure if you can take away the statics totally from the punk, because as Nicoletta said, it's a matter of style too, of how you face how you face the thing, how you face the strange. And each punk is going to look at things a different way. But I want to ask you a question from Cristina Jurado, who's asking here, is punk speculative fiction a way for peripheral movements to shake the centers of power? And I want you to, if possible, to elaborate on that.
Can I say something about this? I mean, the original punk movement was revolution somehow, and it was revolting in two ways, in fact, because it was disgusting. It was supposed to be deliberately disgusting, and it was supposed to be revolution. But at the same time, now we can understand that, for example, women were totally out of the original punk movement. What happened later on is that the issue of revolution became relevant, and the punk movement, in my opinion, punk movement became the icon of revolution. And so this was a good opportunity for peripheries, for marginal identities to get into it and to try and build something new, try and make their voices heard. Of course, I'm particularly interested in the possibility that was open for women, and this possibility were so much connected to, for example, the notion of cyborg in the way it was inflected by Donna Haraway. And this whole idea, in fact, produced a so-called third wave feminism. And this was so important in science fiction because it produced new narratives, and it created a new space, in my opinion, for women to make their voice heard. And the same goes, for example, for Black people, for African American people. The same happened for African American people. Octavia Butler, in fact, came out of that sort of generation, even though she was not so much indebted with punk movement. At the same time, punk was also style, and paradoxically, what was left of punk, when punk developed later on, punk was generated Spice Girls. So the form of punk became extremely fashionable and extremely lucky in terms of business, and it lost political issues that were implied in punk movement at the beginning. What cyberpunk, solarpunk, and other kinds of several different punks make, in fact, is trying to recover. They had the possibility to recover this political meaning. And Fabio, I do agree with you that everything is political, but at the same time, if you want to be an artist, if you want to be a novelist in our case, your attitude is relevant. I mean, you may decide that you want to be political and you want to change things and you want to do something to make the contradiction of capitalism become more evident, or if you want to be simply between inverted commas, a successful novelist. And the two things often do not go together. I don't know if I made myself clear. Is that clear? What I said, I mean. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
I wanted to say something about this.
No, yes, the connection is very bad here. Pepe wants to talk some. Please, Pepe.
Yeah, we have some seconds lag between you and us, Fabio, so that's kind of like weird. Samit, I love this punk. And right here, I could also talk about border punk.
Okay, sorry, connection issues here. Pepe wants to talk, please, Pepe.
And border punk is kind of like
I can hear you now.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Can the rest of you hear me? Okay, yeah, the border punk thing is kind of like wonderful here because there's a lot of science fiction in the north of this country that has its border with the United States that deals with...
Okay, can you hear me? I can hear you.
Okay, that deals with the border.
Yes, okay. It happens, the connection, I'm afraid the connection is bad.
Okay, that deals with the border as a technological device, and I think that's pretty interesting because it's kind of like a part of this piece of punk. I could argue along with Nicoletta and kind of like responding to Christina that it's not only the content of the fiction that makes a punk and faces it off with the dominant kind of like a power. So I also would argue that the way that fiction is distributed, the way that fiction is kind of like that the people organize around that fiction and publish that fiction is kind of like what was really political and what was really interesting about punk. I mean, one of the things that have survived in terms of punk is the DIY ethos. It's kind of like a really big thing. It's not just the content, but it's the way people organize around that content. That should also be kind of like a science fictional concern.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I grew up in a very small town on the edge of England, basically, nowhere to go except get in the sea. And as a punk, like growing up in the punk community, in the music community there, it was. So the original question was about can it shake the centers of power? And for me, like punk at its center, especially kind of the hardcore punk scene that I grew up in the late 90s, was building our own power and building our own communities and sharing resources. And it's one of the things that sometimes frustrates me a little bit about critiques of punk, you know, saying like whether all of these new punk genres are best named, let's say, because I think you can confuse the original sort of 1970s punk for individualism, whereas for me, the punk movement has always been about, you know, sharing space and organizing collectively. And, you know, as Pepe said, like it was growing up, it was DIY, not EMI. And, you know, that was how we ran things. But I was actually also just thinking about the original, about the question around can peripheral movements shake the centers of power? For me, science fiction and cyberpunk, solarpunk, and interestingly, I would personally exclude steampunk, at least in kind of the wider imagination. But for me, the best kind of punk genres are about seeking out the edges of power and finding out where the limits of those things are and what narratives that flow from power, how do they influence the kind of future or the kind of story that you're trying to tell? You know, like you set the world up in motion and then it unspools as you're writing, and then you realize that the edge of the dominant power structure in which we live under is influencing your story in a certain way. And, you know, and then that exposes that edge of, you know, the political, in some sense, the power's edge is then exposed through the story, both to the reader and to the writer. It's a sandbox to investigate.
Okay, I'm still here. Please, Samit, please.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that, you know, it's very interesting to hear all of this from a kind of, you know, around the world perspective, because it's when you're looking at and, you know, to start off, absolutely a peripheral movement can shake centers of powers. I think every time sentence powers are shaken, it's pretty much always from something that is from the periphery, or an accumulation of things from various peripheries that prove impossible to control, especially when they grow in momentum, when they grow in the number of people around whatever your empire, whatever day and age is, that begin to realize that it's time for things to change. And it's fascinating to me to see that when we're looking at the various punks, whether it's cyberpunk, which is what, and it's just about turning 40 at this point in time, and steampunk, which I agree, it's kind of separate from what we're looking at when we're looking at the other ones. It's very interesting to me how the borders between kind of conformity and rebellion play out in our discussions of all of these things, because at the end of the day, radical ideas or different ideas, or even if not individualistic, even if alternate visions of community ideas, are all in a certain direction, which is a non-conformist direction. But they're filtered to people. They're filtered through to people through an industrial process. They're filtered through to people through something that is becoming, and has always been in some sense, essentially a conformist process. And in the 21st century, in a situation where the world is becoming more and more monocultural, where everything is more and more measured, where the tools of conformity are developing faster than the tools of rebellion, and that's often the crux of kind of political conflict anywhere in the world, which is continuously a rebellion trying to outwit the empire, and the empire trying to measure the rebellion and control it. It's very interesting to see how these various punks are evolving to meet the new day, to meet 21st century realities.
That's really interesting, because one of the things I was going to ask was just about how can we still be anti-capitalistic in this scene. I think it seems to me that now more than ever we should make a stand in this sense. And you were also saying lots of relevant things about how the punk suffix must evolve. So we can attend to these expectations, but there seems to me that in time everything becomes a commodity, right? Since the beginning of the punk movement with the Sex Pistols, they were playing for Malcolm McLaren, for the Sex Boutique. There's I'm not sure if there's in English there's this term we call, in Brazil we used to call this commodified punks, like boutique punks, punks de boutique, because they were not really punks in the raw sense of the word. So my question for you would now be what kind of strategies can we use in our punk fiction, from cyberpunk to visa punk, border punk? What kind of strategies could we use, even aesthetically, if that's the case? So we can still be in the front of this uphill battle against capitalism.
I have called Solarpunk.
Anyone who wants, please.
I've called Solarpunk before a narrative strategy, and that's partly just from my experience in kind of the emergence of Solarpunk. But back in 2012, 2013, when it was first beginning on Tumblr, Solarpunk, there was no optimistic fiction facing in the face of climate change at all. And for me, the Solarpunk is a narrative strategy, rather. Is basically to produce or deploy strategic narratives. And what I mean by that is that, as Frederick Jameson and many other authors have written about, science fiction is always about now. And Solarpunk, the best kinds of Solarpunk in my mind, pull technologies and ways of living or ways of being in the world that already exist, and then project them forwards, and imagine what they would be like if permaculture was everywhere, for example. If everybody if there was rain gardens or food forests on the end of every street, for example, the idea of a food forest is a narrative strategy, is a strategic narrative. But all of those things and those ideas about how we respond to the current situation that we're in are embedded within the wider narrative strategy that is kind of Solarpunk, and introducing people to optimistic ways of facing the future given our current condition.
I think that Solarpunk is a definite opportunity to raise hope. It is not only a matter, I do agree with Jay, but it is not only a matter of being optimistic, but also a matter of seeing a way to find a solution, or to cultivate some kind of hope and care in a context where it is really difficult. It is really complicated because we are courting disaster in many respects. At the same time, if I may go back to labels, I think that as writers we should keep in mind that labels are labels. I mean, they are useful for publishers, they are useful for the reader somehow, but when they are lucky, they become fashionable, and when they become fashionable, they are commodified, as Fabio said. So they stop being creative. They tend to stop being creative. So the risk I see now in Italy, for example, that Solarpunk is extremely lucky from the publishing point of view. It is extremely successful. So everybody's trying to write Solarpunk, and it becomes not only a matter of raising some issues which are relevant, or cultivating hope, which is something I'm interested in, for example, or giving more values to a different culture, which is not male, which is not oriented towards violence and towards war, but that is more peaceful and ideally more female. It is not only this kind of matters that are relevant when a label becomes fashionable, but success becomes relevant. Because a writer has to live by his writing, so he has to sell his books. Okay, this is not my problem because I'm not a professional. I do not believe I'm a professional. I make my living to another job, being a professor and earning my money in another way. So I'm totally free. But not everybody lives the same situation or has made the same kind of choice. So you have to, sort of face the market, and the market tends to do with Solarpunk the same kind of operation that has been done with punk. That was political. It used to be political. It became fashionable. It became a style, and then it became Spice Girls, as we said before, as I said before.
Okay, I turned into Fabio. So Fabio unfortunately had some problems with the connection, so I'm taking over. I'm really I'm sorry, but you have to do with me. So the conversation was going, of course, extremely well. I'm very happy, and I will just continue where Fabio left. So the question was, what can we do today to oppose the current state of late capitalism? What are the strategies? And Pepe, you want to add something there?
Yes, sure. This is a question that kind of like runs through my mind a lot during the last, decades. I'm thinking that science fiction is kind of like very comfortable where it is, and has been very comfortable where it is for a long time. In terms that there's a market, there are publishing venues, there's kind of like an agreed upon thing that science fiction is speculative fiction, and that you can buy it at the grocery store. So one of my I don't know, questions or kind of like interests is what about getting science fiction out of its comfortable places? I don't know, for example, the kind of like main mechanism of science fiction, according to Darko Subin, which is kind of like the canonical definition, is that the cognitive estrangement. I mean, you get to the fiction, and there are going to be elements in that fiction that do not correspond to your reality, but you can explain that estrangement through rational means. Okay, how about using cognitive estrangement as a critical tool? I mean, like when you're going to the psychiatrist, why not use cognitive estrangement to ask yourself, why is this normal to you? What kind of mechanisms have made me, I don't know, trusting in bank institutions normal and kind of like the natural way to go? So I think that's one way of taking science fiction and science fiction strategies and kind of like using them. Or what about not labeling science fiction as such and letting the reader kind of like find out if it's science fiction or not? Or what about taking science fiction to the streets instead of thinking about books and the web? What about kind of like moving these tools, these conceptual tools that science fiction has built for a century, and trying to deploy them in places, in ways that are not the usual ways? Because I think science fiction is very comfortable right now where it is.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I would like to say something more about that, because especially in the place where you live, I've found out that science fiction has been brought to the streets in a very strange and alternative way. I came across this concept of artivism, which is, you might say, yes, what is artivism? But if I say Banksy, everybody will immediately understand what it is. So it's art and activism at the same time. And especially, and it was developed in the area of Southern California and Mexico, right? Just it was born in the 90s in that part. So it's like exposing the cracks, exposing all the problems and the nerves of the system in a very visual or in a way experimental way, right? So last year when we were in the panel with the famous American Kim Stanley Robinson, he didn't really like the term punk because of all the background, cultural background and anarchism and counterculture that it brings with this suffix. So I thought that maybe we should kind of call it solartivism. I've created this word because maybe it's about not using the punk, which it goes into that era, into that time. So it's maybe time that we move on that. And I would like to go to Samit, because there's one thing that in India strikes me a lot about being punk, and it's the jugad, the way that people reuse, reshape, and change and take ownership of the things that probably global capitalism is imposing on all the layers and all the geographies of the world, right? So this way of taking technology and use it in the local, innovative way, I think it is the revolution of our time. Because I remember when I was a kid, I was opening up all the hardware and changing the hard disk and the DIMMs but now all these devices are closed. We cannot open it, and if we cannot open it, we cannot own them. We cannot change them. We cannot update them. We cannot be punk anymore. So we need another way to take ownership. And that's where Solarpunk, maybe in a jugad way, could be into the picture, right? What do you think?
Well, I love that. I love that you brought up jugaad, and it's fascinating hearing all of you speak, because what stands out to me is this fundamental optimism, this fundamental sense that that we can, through the power of your imagination, the power of speculation, the power of finding ways to take fascinating new ideas and use them in innovative and relentless ways to kind of improve the world. It's really great to hear, because it's kind of what the political heart of speculative fiction is. So thank you all for that. For me though, what has been most baffling and confusing over the last few years especially, is that the central problems that the world is facing. It's very clear that given a certain amount of common sense, given a certain amount of collaboration, that the technology already exists to really fix a lot of things that are that need improvement, that need resolution in the world today. But it seems that the most radical science fiction or fantasy concept of all is that people might be capable of working together to achieve a common goal, or people might be capable of working together to defeat a common enemy, whether it's the coronavirus or fascism or whatever that common enemy is. But in day-to-day life and through the endless circus of the news, we are constantly seeing, wherever we are in the world, that in many ways the problem is not that the technology doesn't exist, or that the expertise doesn't exist, through which a lot of the biggest problems of the world might be addressed, if not resolved. But the lack of common cause, the lack of common sense, even is what is holding us back in so many ways. And I don't know if any kind of intelligence-based, expertise-based, artistic or scientific movement is ever going to be enough to resolve that, because a lot of that resolves, is about political problems that are post-logic or pre-logic or some kind of strange time loop of all of these things. So when you say Jugaad, Francesco, I love the spirit in which you see it, because you see it as this kind of street innovation that is in many ways the heart of cyberpunk, right? It's what happens when concepts hit the street, and what happens when things are used in ways that no one had previously conceived. Perhaps even the creator of the tool or the tech had not conceived that it could be used that way. But when I see Jugaad in another way, I see it as people making innovations out of desperation because they don't have access to the conventional way of using the technology, or they just, when systems don't work, people do crazy things to survive, and some of those are very cool. But it becomes increasingly difficult to separate the kind of technological, scientific, the cool aspect of everything that's happening, with the growing sense of doom of why do people have to do Jugaad in the first place. So it's been great hearing much more optimistic visions that all of you have been sharing.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm not advocating a kind of Jugaad as a solution, but Jugaad as a strategy. I mean, if we need to cope with the current state of the lack of ownership and lack of possibility to change and really be the feeling of owning something, then we can, if we cannot smash it, we can at least tweak it. We can, change it. Yeah, but the thing is, and this is going, from hardware is going to software, of course. So we see that, even the network that was a free place is not free anymore. So we need to, as you said, the empire tried to control you, and you try to escape that control. So it's just a matter of these fights that are changing over time. So the original fight of the punks became, in the 70s, became the fight of the cyberpunk in the 80s and 90s, and now we have the fight of the solarpunk, because it's not enough to fight capitalism. Now we need to fight climate change, and that is a huge hyper object, to quote another important philosopher, that it was impossible to perceive at that time. So new problems call for new strategies, and that's probably why we need more punks. We need new punks that can understand this. Jay, I would like to ask you, for example, what are these kind of new strategies that are on the horizon?
There's two things came to mind while everyone was talking, and that was partly around like the anti-capitalism of the framing of the panel, and then secondly, we were talking about the strategies. One of the things that Solarpunk is quite deliberate about, at least in the Solarpunk community and the way it developed, is that Solarpunk is not so much around. It's not just about taking ideas that already exist. It's about putting more than one idea next to each other, because Solarpunk as a genre bloomed on the internet, and its logics are deeply embedded with the nature of spaces like Tumblr and Reddit and so on and so forth. So for me, one of the things that I think about the strategies of Solarpunk is that if you imagine your Facebook feed, for example, or if you look up the Solarpunk hashtag on Tumblr, there'll be a picture of a permaculture rain garden next door to a lean-to greenhouse, next door to urban planning, theories of urban planning, next door to people quoting Murray Bookchin and ecological socioecology, and then you have and then people will be quoting ecological anarchism and so on and so forth. And all of these ideas are a mosaic or a tapestry of ideas from which with these bits of information or these units or these ideas, when in juxtaposition with one another, rather than combining these things in juxtaposition, then inspire and create new futures. For me, as a strategy, Solarpunk is largely about inspiring the individuals who encounter it to think about the world around them in new ways, because via their exposure to Solarpunk as a genre, they in the best cases, they are exposed to practicable ideas like Jugyard features in Solarpunk stories, for example, and DIY water heaters and various things like that. And I think it's like once you understand that these things exist, and through your consumption of science fiction or through Solarpunk, you see the world with new eyes, and then you wonder why there is that wasted space behind the train station where we could be growing fruit trees, or there's like the corner of the street that's like perfect for a community chicken yard, or what I mean. And I don't necessarily think that those it's why we need more voices writing Solarpunk and other kind of fictions, because when these things occur, it allows people within their own contexts to have these ideas that have been in juxtaposition, to arise. And then the other part is, I was just thinking about like the kind of the anti-capitalism of the panel. If we see the development of the state and capitalism as a process, are we at the point where the thing that we are trying to force is a post-capitalism rather, the only way out is through, to use a trite phrase, but yeah, like the Solarpunks are like for me. Well, I mean, this is Andrew Dana Hudson's phrase, but Solarpunk is about moving quietly and planting things rather than tackling questions head on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to rewind a bit the conversation and going back to the original punk or the cyberpunk, because is there a lesson that we can learn in order to avoid certain mistakes or certain pitfalls, because as Nicoletta correctly said, the original punk became the Spice Girls, and the cyberpunk became the Matrix, right? So capitalism tend to eat, digest, and turn into a commodity everything. So having this experience, what can we do to avoid again to be turned into a kind of greenwashing capitalism that we see rising in many parts, in commercials, in advertisement, in music. I've seen also a Solarpunk singer, very Solarpunk video clip lately. So what are the lessons that we can take from the past? Nicoletta, what do you think?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things that we could do. The first one is that we could be aware of what's happening and of the way in which we are trying to give shape to a new way, new gaze. I like what they said about Solarpunk as reinforcing and generating this new gaze. And I would add that what Solarpunk makes is, making us aware that we are not in control. We should give up controlling everything as human beings. And we should try to understand that we can be defeated by nature, that we can survive only if the world survive with us. So that's a part of it. Be aware is not enough. We should also be brave enough to stick to our awareness and to take a standpoint and to be brave in protecting, defending our ideas and transform our ideas in a way of life. This implies in terms of for writers, this implies taking a position, for example, about the publishing business, about the cultural practices which are dominating and which are basically capitalistic, that they are producing a culture that is constantly reproducing the mechanism of capitalism. So be aware, be brave. And then I read a comment which was about being angry and about rage and anger as useful emotions. They can be useful. They can be extremely useful. We shouldn't stop being angry about being oppressed, about being manipulated by the usual mechanism of capitalism. So all of this should become a way of life. That's what we can do, and it is a small part of a change. I do not believe that as a writer, as a professor, as an educator, I do not believe that I can change the whole world, but I can do my part, and I should go on being aware that capitalism is evil because it's oppressive, because it is depriving us of freedom, because it is creating margins and borders and second-class citizens and so on and so forth. If I stick to this awareness, and if I teach this awareness through my novels, through my teaching, also through my way of life, maybe a few things could change. Probably it's optimistic, but I want to try. I don't want to give in.
In this time, we need some optimism, actually, in this current dystopia and nihilism that we live in. So, Pepe, lessons, hard lessons we learned.
What you were saying, that dystopia has become the new realism. I was thinking also about how for a lot of people, especially here, this is about survival. This is about kind of just getting along day to day, and how that produces an anger that can be directed. I also think direct confrontation. Here everybody has more guns than the people who wish for a kind of like different way of arranging things. there's a U.S. military, there's the Mexican army, and there's the narcos. So it's kind of like a direct confrontation that should only be used tactical. In terms of the labeling, I think one should be very, very cautious about labeling. When someone starts labeling what you do and what you do, I think the tactical point is to move to another place. Because if some I can understand being tagged as something that's kind of like the only way of getting recognized today, because there's so many information, there's so many things that these categories are useful for kind of like organizing stuff. But it's also kind of, if it's strong enough to be named, if it's strong enough to be kind of like put in just a word, it's probably because it's losing its edge. Okay, or will lose its edge soon. So it's kind of like, okay, so what's next? Because these aesthetic tools, these kind of like aesthetic arrangement, and kind of like philosophical arrangement about a thing, is going to be weaponized against you sooner or later, or against what you were trying to do. So kind of like moving through the edges, as Jay was saying, kind of like finding out what's on the edges is kind of like what I would think a kind of like interesting way to fight this up, without having kind of like a total answer. Remember, I mean, no plus. If we had, we could be building a religion. We're not writing science fiction.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Samit, you have some ideas about this?
Yeah, actually, I do. In the sense that I think a lot of the way forward. I think last year, I think one of the most inspiring and also entertaining things I saw was, I think, young people in, I forget which city it was. I think it was Houston. They were using K-pop songs. They were using K-pop signals to jam police radios in order to. I don't remember what the context was, but it was protest related. I think it was during Black Lives Matter. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking how, the last few years, along with the regular dystopian broadcast that is the headlines, has also given us a lot of fantastic opportunities to not just look at the many things that are wrong with the world, but also to examine the privileges that we ourselves have. And in many cases, and this especially holds true for men, for cisgendered people. There are a lot of privileges that we weren't even particularly conscious about having, that conversations around the world on race, gender, sexuality, a number of other things, have, I think, at least increased awareness of the privileges that we have. And I think capitalism is inescapable in many ways. For those of us really who do not have ways to escape it or to have alternate lives outside it. One interesting avenue is to use whatever privileges we have to find interesting ways to subvert the tools that are being used against us, to find innovative ways to use these tools to create confusion, to create opportunities to let more people into systems that we may have unconsciously been keeping them out of, to create communities, to find ways to, make little revolutions where it might not even be obvious to anyone that we're doing anything but conforming, belonging to systems, seeking popularity, seeking belonging, finding ways to just do other things under the steady guise. And we're seeing tools like this being used a lot in protests and countercultures all over the world. The more the creep of surveillance grows, the more the creep of data mining grows, the less it becomes, possible for many people to perform any kind of open disobedience. So the innovation that we're clearly capable of as a species and as artists has to be funneled in new and interesting ways to deal with these times. Which is why I brought up the example of, BTS versus the Houston police.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, that's not easy, of course. It's a complicated field, but I wonder. I don't know, Jay. You want to add something to this? Because I think that the threat of greenwashing and as Nicoletta said, if something becomes so popular, like it's in Italy, everybody want a piece of the cake, and everybody wants to put the tag Solarpunk on their thing. So how do we kind of differentiate? How can we communicate what is Solarpunk from the kind of what was the commercial? You remember Adi or something? There was a
Chobani.
Japan. Yes, that they kind of made this advertisement totally Solarpunk style. So they are gonna get there. What can we do?
I would first of all, literally yesterday, Vice Motherboard released a long read about Solarpunk and anti-capitalism. I don't know if anyone can drop that in the chat because that's worth reading and checking out. For me, I guess there's kind of two separate things. Like, first of all, with regard to greenwashing, it depends on what you think Solarpunk is. Like, if Solarpunk is primarily the aesthetics, then the aesthetics are going to get swallowed by the machine, that is capitalism. And Mark Fisher writes about this a lot, about how it subsumes ideas and makes it its own to, in some sense, defang them. And if Solarpunk is purely about the aesthetics, then I think that's going to happen. But if Solarpunk is actually about producing new futures for individuals and people who are involved in reading the context, then the aesthetics can shift and change. And for me, the aesthetics of Solarpunk as they are currently, because I would add, back in 2014, it was the age of sail. There was a lot of people posting like 14th, 15th century shit, tall ships. That was kind of like what Solarpunk looked like, but with more solar panels. Rather than the kind of the green look, the green cities that we have. I mean, I have a very simple test, and that's that if an image of the future, of a green future, has people in it, then it's Solarpunk. If not, then it's kind of an eco-brutalist greenwashing. Those images that go up around the neighborhood before they knock down before they knock down all the buildings, the community buildings, and build like flats on them. And one of the things for me that I've been thinking about recently is about aesthetics arising from praxis. So you have a certain way of behaving and being in the world as a community of people who think about the world in a certain way, and therefore the aesthetics arise from that praxis. And I think that in some sense, like, that's what happened to cyberpunk, which had a praxis and a political critique, and had a way of seeing the world. And then it was the aesthetics that got stolen or subsumed by kind of like the white. And I mean, you can buy a Buzzcocks t-shirt in Hot Topic, for example. It's like, or an Anarchist A t-shirt, in H&M in the UK, for example. So the question is that, like, I can't remember where I was going, but yeah, essentially, like, if the future looks a certain way in people's minds, it's because those futures are a product of the praxis of ways of seeing in the world. And that if greenwashing happens, then it is up to the individuals who are solarpunks or people who write sci-fi to fill in those greenwash futures with better stories. Like, if it's just aesthetics, we are the people that add the narratives to those images. It's not the other way around.
All right.
Francesco, if I may say something.
Sure, of course.
Personally, apart from the fact that I do totally agree with what Jay said, I'd like to clear up what I said about the Solarpunk lack in Italy at the moment. I think this is just becoming more and more important. It is not yet extremely popular from the point of view of the publishers. But what I notice is that, I mean, first of all, Solarpunk is not considered science fiction by the publishers and by the reading public, which is extremely, extremely relevant in the Italian context, because in the Italian context, literature is mainstream literature. Then you have popular genres, and science fiction is below popular genres. It has always been like this, and it goes on being like this. You may call it dystopia, and if you call it dystopia, it may be published. It may be published, it may be read at school, it may be used in the education, it may be used, it may be studied at university. If it is science fiction, it is not considered at all. So what Solarpunk is doing at the moment, this label is proving extremely lucky, because critics take it into consideration. So many novels, mostly proven novels that have been translated into Italian, and I'm thinking in particular of Oval by Elvia Wilk, that was published in Italian by a small publisher, Zona 42, and it was extremely lucky, and it was successful also from the critical point of view. And this is unusual, extremely unusual for a science fiction book.
I would just like to add that Elvia has a really great long read that she wrote back in 2016 on Solarpunk for Eflux, which is really worth reading. She wrote that a long time ago.
So. You're right. The other aspect which is interesting about what was happening in the Italian context is that Solarpunk is felt as extremely interesting by the feminist circles, by the feminist movement. They're very much interested in the possibilities granted by this sort of narrative. And they, I think with good reason, they connect Solarpunk with Donna Haraway, Staying with the Trouble, which has been also in this case extremely, it was translated in Italian, and it is extremely successful, extremely popular. So these two things are comforting. I mean, they are good things. I'm not sure that we are able to make what Jay suggests, and what I think is right, it is create a kind of narrative which is tightly related to a kind of practice, a way of life. But we're trying. I think there's a possibility, and it is a good possibility. I mean, new fields grant this sort of opportunities because they open new opportunities, new areas of development. Let's see what happens. It depends on us, of course.
Okay. I will throw in a question from the audience now. So beyond Solarpunk, what are the other anti-capitalist trends, works, approaches you have seen, if you have any idea on these? I don't, but maybe you have.
I think Fabio said something about this when he said that everything is political. It depends on what you do with the genre. No, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there was some times ago, there still is, of course, this idea of hope punk, just to oppose to the current dystopian time that we're living. But I think that anything can be hopeful. So I don't think that hope is a political platform. So it doesn't have the strength to oppose to the capitalism. On the other side, I've seen cyberpunk being completely absorbed into the mainstream dialogue conversation. When I see riots in Hong Kong and they're using laser beams to fight against surveillance camera, I think that we are into a cyberpunk narrative, and when that's on TV show, that's we are there. So we need to as the science fiction writers and thinkers, kind of move on and try to address the weak signals, or maybe, the signals that are already there, and that could become, I don't want to say the next big thing, because the next big thing is already here, and we know it, and we can name it. But the changing the strategy, and I don't know. I wish there were other movements. As Nicoletta said, I see these convergence of Extinction Rebellion, We're 99, the Earth Strike, all these little droplets that are kind of going into one bigger stream. So maybe that's the thing, every 20, 30 years we feel the desire to call it in a name, but it's always there. It's the protest, is the idea that there is a better future, there is an alternative reality, and we inhabit that in science fiction. So, well, yeah, I don't know, Pepe, you have any idea what's going on the border where you are?
The science fiction comes and goes in cycles here, and right now it's not going through a very healthy cycle.
Yeah.
Particularly now. At the same time, I was thinking about I don't know if there are any other kind of like movements around here, but the idea of fictioning, for example, of creating fictions and letting them roll out in the world, maybe not exactly science fictioning, but just fictioning. I think it's kind of like interesting, and playing out fictions out in the streets can be a possibility for I don't know. I'm thinking the loose right now, creating a new people, letting these things gather its own gravity and people going towards them. But I'm also thinking about what I would call a science fiction theory, what Cesare Ronez calls a science fiction theory, which is not theory of a science fiction, the theory of science fiction, but theory that uses the mechanisms of science fiction. And I'm thinking about when you read a science fiction a story or novel, you're kind of like, it's not real, but it's real. So I think, for example, Nicoletta has been mentioning Haraway. Haraway uses the devices of science fiction to write theory. So kind of like erasing that border seems to me right now kind of like interesting to explore. Writing theory as if you were writing science fiction. And I think a lot of people are doing it right now. And I think I find it really appealing.
Thank you. Samit, you want to jump in?
No, sorry, I got distracted by Jay's question about the farmers' strike in India and its influence on cultural production, art, music. And it's an excellent question. It was very relevant, and I'm first of all sorry to say that because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to visit the sites. But from what I've been hearing from friends who've been going there, it's been fascinating, not only in its scale and its resilience, but also they've been doing very interesting things with Jugaad that Francesco had mentioned, because they've been, they have their own newspapers, they've been innovating solutions to tough weather. They've been finding ways to, on an almost live basis, deal with the constant propaganda and violence incitement that of various innovative measures that are being brought against them, and still holding together in the face of apathy from the state, active hostility from various groups, and kind of, the dwindling of mainstream attention. So in terms of wider production of culture, art, music, and so on, it's nothing that will be allowed to reach the mainstream media as yet. It's something that I think books will talk about at great length over the next 3 or 4 years. But in terms of cultural production and art and music and various other things, on the actual site, as a phenomenon of live revolution in multiple directions on a scale that is truly inspiring, they're doing amazing things. We're just not getting the images out of there, but that will change. I think over time there will be a lot of collective inspiration from there.
All right. Okay. I think we are almost there. I think we are, kind of explored these ideas that we kind of didn't talk about steampunk because it kind of reactionary in a way. So it took the power, the aesthetic of the power, and kind of reshaped it. In some ways advocating a kind of change, but not really much. And the cyberpunk, of course, had a political platform, but didn't really, from my personal point of view, find a solution, or at least they just pointed the finger saying, if this goes on, and now we are in that kind of reality that they have brilliantly depicted, with hyper-capitalism, with the network and data thefts and stealing, and profilization and all these surveillance capitalism that we are really living in. But there was no solution. So from my point of view, the latest embodiment of this kind of feeling is Solarpunk. They are trying to address some of the issues, at least pointing out at solutions, not just at the problems. I think we are at this situation. Of course, there might be other weak signals that we haven't captured at the moment. And what I particularly like is the fact that this movement it doesn't have a center. I like to mention that the first Solarpunk anthology came from Brazil, and the movement is now open to a global conversation, and like we're doing here. So this is important because, as Pepe said, maybe we need to move these targets. We need to be not easily, tracked in a language, in a country, in one single identity. So maybe we need to stay as wide as possible.
I would just like to thank everybody who's on the panel for speaking English, because I know this is one of Francesco's, the bells that he always rings about the dominance of the English language in science fiction publishing. But I really appreciate everyone speaking English on the panel.
I consider it a necessary bad, We use it as a bridge to communicate. It's
The
like
imperialism of English.
Yes, but I wouldn't advocate Latin as a lingua franca. So it's too late. But maybe 50 years old use Mandarin. Who knows? Or Spanish. So it's we need to adapt. That's one. We need to adapt. So yeah, it's important, but it's important that we can communicate, but it's also important that we translate ideas from one language to the other, and we are aware of the dominance of one culture at the moment. That's why I'm interested in all we called this edition of FutureCon Native Innovation because I think that it's important to regenerate the local ideas that were in a way overshadowed or completely erased by a global capitalism that sells you an iPhone all over the world at the same time, from Tokyo to Rio. So this layer of international global capitalism should be tweaked, should be, not rejected, but as Samit said, used it, against the offender in a way. But I'm not saying the offender, but say have sort of networks that could make the identities and the culture come back. Because we are seeing this reduction of alternatives, we're seeing this compression of scenarios into one single mainstream dystopia. It's not like that. It shouldn't be like that. So we need to fight. That's the thing. And that's the idea I want to leave to the audience and to you. If I don't know if you want to add a final remark, something.
Thank you so much for having me here. I learned so much from all of you. So thank you with all my heart.
It's really a pleasure.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So that, thank you all so much. I learned a lot, and it was an absolute pleasure to be here and to talk to and learn from all of you.
This is just the beginning.
As a final kind of like a thing to drop here, indigenous science fiction, I think, should be something that we cultivate and help develop, because right now they are the people who can't speak English. So they are left out of this global conversation, and I think it's a kind of like a local effort. It should be kind of like a really important thing for us to invest in different visions from the future for people who don't even speak English, because I mean we're all contaminated by English, and we're trying to subvert this kind of like Anglocentrism. But I think it's an important thing. It was a great panel. Thanks a lot. It was a great talk, and very nice meeting Nicoletta, Jay, and Samit. Thanks a lot, Francesco.
You know, Pepe, the last panel of this edition is going to be called Panamericana, and it's going to be in Spanish. Yeah, so we try to, we try to put it. Huh?
Spanish is an imperial language.
Yeah, it is an imperial language, but we try to include.
It's like
it is an imperial language.
It's not the empire favored by history right now.
All widespread languages, even if we take French, it's yeah. But at least we put them on the same level. At least we try, to include the big bunch. I mean, big network.
No, and I think you're trying to use like English. It's a subversive tool, and just a way to allow me to talk to Samit and to Nicoletta and to Jay, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it, and the conversation has been really, really interesting. Yeah, learned a lot, and happy to have met you. I hope you all, be well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Remember, tomorrow we have another day of FutureCon. You can follow the conversation on our Discord server. You can check the panels on our website, and you can, if you like what we did, donate as much as you want on our website. This is all free and will stay forever on YouTube as long as YouTube will exist. Goodbye. Good night. Ciao.
Buenas noches.
Bye.
William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes, and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.